It is 8:36. Let's call this meeting to order. And Anthony has asked that when we speak, that we speak into the microphones so that it can be recorded. And he said if you don't speak into them, it will not be heard. So the meeting has been called to order. We are here to discuss a budget workshop. And Morgan, I suppose you are the star of this show. So you are on, ma'am.
Good morning. We have some items here for discussion today. It's certainly y'all's pleasure if you want to interrupt me as we go. I've built in stopping points, kind of natural places in the presentation where it makes sense to. We have finished a topic, perhaps we want to stop and have discussion then about that stuff, or have a break, or whatever your preference is. Y'all just flag me down if I'm moving full speed ahead, and I'll slow down and we'll talk about whatever you like. The first item we wanted to talk about today, the first major item in this presentation, is to talk about connecting the goals and priorities set forth at the council retreat to be put into action in the fiscal year 15 budget. And so some of these items will be multi-year items for sure, or may need an identified separate funding source. However, we're prepared to speak to each of those in detail. And so this first slide here is just a reminder of what those goals and priorities are in summary. So the first one that you have there before you is water infrastructure and long-term water supply. The first sub-item under that in the goals and priorities was to decrease water loss to 12% or less within a 5-year period. And so certainly relevant staff has been working on this since the retreat to get some action. And so there are actions underway at this time. Ricky Dixon and his staff are testing, studying, and assessing ways to reduce this loss related to the operating system. We are moving forward with items to address that. At this time, there's no need for financial resources tied to this specific item, and there's no additional approval needed from the council at this time.
We'll revisit this. We'll come back to this here in a minute.
And continue. So that's the first major thing, is that there is testing and assessment and studies going on right now. The second item to address this one subtopic about reducing the water loss is that we need a system maintenance and replacement strategy to refine and plan in the proposed rate study to fund a capital component of this, and the study will also identify what resources are necessary, primarily financial resources are necessary to realize that goal. And so that's something that we don't have those details yet, but it is something that staff is working towards. We wanted to address it in today's format so that you knew that there would be more information coming on that.
The key is we wanted to identify action steps necessary to move the organization toward council's goals. The water utility staff is working to identify water usage or loss points and see how controllable those are at this point. One of the things they know, though, is that they need additional main replacement efforts, and they'll work to I think probably the best way to do that is work in coordination with the planned rate study in order to determine what kind of pace we would adopt for replacing those mains, and what the relative cost would be associated with that effort. So the key here is we need main replacement. Right now we're thinking that goes hand in hand with performing the water rate study.
Continuing on with water infrastructure and long-term water supply, the next sub-item that came out of the retreat was to approve and implement a water conservation plan within 6 months. So certainly that's within the time frame for the fiscal year 15 budget. This will involve meetings with stakeholder groups and the Water Advisory Board. There's no financial resources or additional approval needed from the council at this time as we move forward with those solutions and bringing you a final plan that will come before the council. But at this time, it's not necessarily part of today's budget discussion. The next sub-item under water infrastructure and long-term water supply is to secure a diversified long-term water solution within 10 years. We have a good head start on this. We have several items that we are working towards to have a long-term water solution. today and in the coming 10 years. The first item there is the water reuse study that's been before the council and the Development Corporation for funding. So we're doing that study, and it may yield positive results towards this priority. The next item there is the Red Arroyo study, which also could yield substantial results towards long-term water supply. Of course, continuing in the West Texas Water Partnership. And so just to recap, for those 3 items that we're working on right now, they're already funded and have council approval to move ahead. We'll continue to pursue these and other solutions, and certainly keep the council up to date as we move toward those items to speak to a diversified water solution.
Before we, if you don't mind, before we move into streets, what we're trying to figure out is what action do we need in this next budget in order to make progress on these. And the key with water is we're going to need to figure out a way to pay for the study. And so we've already started looking for savings in the current budget that we can grab a hold of and use for that study, and not ask for more dollars for that study. We want to try to use current year savings to pay for that as we get ready to make a proposal.
We actually did a budget amendment late Thursday to fund that item, that we did identify savings. And so.
You did find
Yes,
some
sir.
savings? All right. Then when we get ready to come back, I think you're going to see that it comes back with a proposed set of dollars that were identified as savings in the current year budget. So the key is no action necessary to move us toward water as we discuss budget for this year
That's correct.
at this point.
So that moves us to the second of the council goals and priorities, which is streets, including renewed infrastructure and maintenance. The first sub-item that came out of the retreat for that was the renewal of all city streets, that 1/7 of streets per year, or 100% of streets over 7 years would receive some kind of maintenance effort. So the first item we need to speak to there is a street assessment that we have that to do a study of where our streets are today. And so that is funded, and we have that out for a proposal to receive a response on that right now. So at this time, there's no additional financial resources requested for that, and there's no additional approval needed from the council today, but we will bring certainly the results of that and moving forward what would be needed in addition to that. The next item would be to develop a street maintenance strategy. Shane Kelton has been diligently working towards identifying a dollar amount that might be necessary to include these items: the crack seal, seal coat, and pothole maintenance. That would be an additional cost to the current budget. In addition to the current budget, we would need $2,675,000 in fiscal year 15 budget to really have a comprehensive street maintenance strategy as requested by the council.
That puts us on a 7-year, I'm sorry, Daniel, go ahead.
No, all I was going to say is we're talking about maintenance at this point. We're not talking about the actual reconstruction of those streets. So this is strictly just maintenance and making sure that we take care of what we have right now, that so it doesn't deteriorate any further, and that it's taken care of. So again, that's just maintenance at this point.
And this is our first action item. This is the first item that we want to try to make some progress on.
Yeah.
Note that the street assessment, it's in the works, it's funded, we're moving down the road on that. We don't need money or action. The second item, though, is to fund an annual maintenance program. And so that becomes one of our goals for this budget cycle, is increasing that dollar amount so we can move toward a 7-year cycle on that maintenance program.
In the $2.6 million, does that address 1/7 of the streets, or is that just a beginning point, or?
That amount of money.
Shane, can you please speak on the mic? I've been asked to. There's one available here.
These additional dollars, coupled with the dollars that we already have in our budget, that puts our seal coat and our maintenance program on a 7-year cycle.
And someone will coordinate so we don't seal coat a street right before we replace a main.
Correct. The seal coat, yes, but the seal coat is not more of the permanent structure like when you do the asphalt overlays, to where you're actually going in there and putting down 1.5 to 2 inches of overlay. The seal coat is something that if you had to tear one of them up, that would be the one to tear up. But we are going to try to coordinate with Ricky on the maintenance efforts.
Great, thanks.
It's a good point. Very good point.
So that brings us to the next item related to streets, which is to develop a reconstruction strategy. Shane and his staff are developing, will develop that as a result of the street assessment, which of course is still out for bid, and we're waiting on those responses. The resources necessary, the financial resources, would also be developed at that time. So for the street reconstruction strategy, the bigger item here, there's no council action needed at this time, and we will follow up after the street assessment results to identify the financial resources needed and what council action would be needed. The next item that was on the council goals and priorities were salaries and adjustment to market. And so the first sub-item under that was to reach target, which is to be determined by the HR study, within a 3-year period, possibly 4 years for all staff members. So our goal is to utilize the benchmarking process that has been developed by the Human Resources Department. It's a process that meets best practices and has a recommendation that comes out of it. We've identified a figure here as a placeholder. That first year of a 3-year implementation would be approximately $2.5 million across all funds. And so that number will change as we sharpen our pencils on knowing exactly what that study will yield and what the council goals on that would be specifically as far as percentage raises or to what degree we want to get to, whether it's 3 or 4 years. So just to have a figure to work with today, we have identified $2.5 million, which is roughly equivalent to 5% across the board raises for all at current benefit rates. So to know where that number came from, that's where it is, but we expect to really laser in on that and get an accurate picture of exactly where each pay grade is behind or which ones need the greatest adjustment.
This does not include the meet and confer with the police department?
We have included a placeholder for meet and confer. However, there's some uncertainty there on exactly where that contract's going to be. And so to have a comprehensive picture of raises across the organization, we did include a figure. So that's all we had for you on salaries. We will continue to work that and bring it to you later in the budget. The next item that was on the council goals and priorities was improved development process. The staff relevant staff has already begun meetings to develop specific goals and related strategies. The resources for that would need to be determined. And so, for example, if we allowed e-submissions for permits and inspections applications, that would require some kind of investment in technology. And so as we identify those goals and what strategies would be needed to meet those goals, any price tags or investment in making those moves will be submitted at that time. That's still being developed, so we don't really have figures for you today on that yet. We'll continue to research that and bring proposals to council as we progress towards getting that to a level that meets those council goals and priorities. And the final item there that was that came out of the retreat was a police station to replace with newer refurbished. I think there was some discussion that we could have a bond election after the specifics are vetted out and determined if the total cost exceeds the $5 million, which is set aside in the current debt plan. So we've already begun discussions, holding meetings, and exploring options. So there's no council action needed at this time for the police station. Proposed requests for resources will be presented to the council once they are developed. And just as a note, the 2014-19 capital improvement plan submission was for $25,910,000 and change. So we're working towards solutions on that. So in summary of the proposed items to meet the council goals and priorities, as I mentioned, many of these will be multi-year items that we speak to as we continue to develop them. So for the first item, the water infrastructure and supply, excuse me, we're still working on that to know exactly after we have that assessment. But for right now, for today's discussion, we have $0 identified to be added to the fiscal year 15 budget. We're certain that will change as we get more information. But for today's discussion, we don't have a figure to work with on that yet. So we will come back to that as we have more details.
But that also is not likely to happen this year, right? I mean, we're not likely to ask for capital dollars for infrastructure based on the rate study this year, because the rate study can't be done that quickly. So while we know that we need those dollars, the development of a plan and how to collect those dollars right now, we're saying we think is rooted in the development of the rate study.
And the
So
goal
today-
was the overall 5-year plan as well, to get that down to 12%. So we're being very realistic, because we know that we do have failing infrastructure as far as the leaking, the cast iron pipes, and so it's not something that we're going to fix overnight. I know that I was asked about that because I mentioned $136 million in needs just on infrastructure. We're not saying we're doing that overnight. It's going to be planned out over several years, and that water rate study will kind of give us a pretty good indication of where we should be going with that.
And the other thing, and somebody's already touched on it earlier, is the coordination of that main replacement with street reconstruction. That'll take a significant effort.
The next item there, item B, under the council goals and priorities, are street maintenance. Again, what we've identified that for inclusion in the fiscal year 15 would be an additional $2,675,000. So that's the point item on that, the item that would need action. Item C, for salaries, the $2,541,000 that we spoke about earlier, that is across all funds, across all personnel. The next to last item there, item D, improved development process, $0 identified at this time for what would be needed to move forward with that strategy. And the final item there, police station, $0 for the fiscal year 15 operating budget, simply because this would be a debt issue or a bond election. This would be something outside of our operating budget preparation. So those are the items we were speaking to you about the council goals and priorities. The next section that we have is about other items that we need council direction on, or that we're bringing to the council for discussion. The first one there is pay-as-you-go capital. Just a reminder that we have some funds set aside for that, and we have some more detail on that I'll get into shortly. The second item that staff would request council discussion with is about the wastewater pilot fee, which we have a resolution about to address in the budget cycle, so we'll speak to that as well. The third item there is health insurance, that there will be a increased cost related to health insurance this year, and we have some details on that as well. And the last item there are services that are lacking adequate staff and or financial resources. So these are items that managers and directors have identified during the budget process that are not operating at the level necessary to provide adequate services to citizens. And so we have details on that as well. So the first one there that we have is the pay-as-you-go capital item. Recall that a few years ago we started setting this money aside as cash on hand available to address capital issues. There's $1,758,000 budgeted, proposed in the fiscal year 15 budget. Of course, $250,000 of that is needed right off the top to start funding towards a fire truck. The remaining $1.5 million is available for other items, and just to keep aware as the council gives direction on what capital items we want to move forward with in the new year, that those are the funds available for that. The second item there is the wastewater pilot, which we talked extensively about last budget cycle. We wanted a placeholder and a reminder this year on where we were on that. The council resolution in November of 2014 was to reduce it by $100,000 in last fiscal year 14, and to discuss the remaining $400,000 in the fiscal year 15 budget preparation. So we'll need final direction as we balance the general fund budget, which is later in the discussion. We have some items there to speak to that. The third item that staff is requesting direction from the council on is regarding health insurance. We're very early on in our proposals for employee and retiree health insurance, we do anticipate that there will be an increased cost on the employer contribution. Our early estimates are telling us that we should plan on a 12 to 14% increase. That could be up to $828,000 across all funds. That would be 14% of what we're currently paying for the city contribution for employee and retiree health insurance. So that would be needed across all funds to satisfy that item, and that's also more of a placeholder item as we move forward with sharpening our pencil on that, getting final bids in, final compliance issues in on what we need to be compliant with and finalized by January 1st, 2015. The last item I have there for what the staff is asking for direction on are that there are services that the city offers that are lacking adequate staff and or financial resources. And so what's been identified to date by directors and managers through our regular budget process is $6,030,000 and change, which would be an additional need to the general fund to fund these items appropriately. The staff budget review convened and identified just over $1.3 million that was necessary to be included in the proposed budget, and so that's what's been. It was included in our June 17th discussion of what items were necessary, just to keep the status quo. So there's a remaining requests of over $4.7 million that are needed, that the directors and managers have identified that are necessary to provide services at the appropriate levels. And we do have detail on that as a handout today. So those are the items that we were asking for further council direction on. And just as a reminder where we are on the general fund, we had identified revenue up at $63,426,000, which is a $2.5 million increase. Expenditures up slightly to $61,916,000. So as the budget is presented to you today, it's at a revenue over expenditure of $1,510,000. So with that, I'm prepared to move forward with plugging in the items we've discussed so far today.
Morgan, this is general fund only, right?
Yes, sir. The general fund, I believe, is where we've identified the biggest need and the biggest need for discussion today. And so this is general fund.
Remember, in a previous discussion, we talked about several funds, but in that discussion, we highlighted where we identified that our two biggest financial attention getters exist in the general fund and the water fund. The water due to low water sales and the financial crisis it creates, and then the general fund due to the overwhelming needs associated with the services that are provided there. So the point being that today I think we're focusing on the general fund. Is that right?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
So if we take this figure from the slide before, that we had $1.5 million approximately available for direction on funding items. As we discussed before, the council priorities and goals, this is primarily street maintenance of $2,675,000, and the remainder is raises. That there would be a need to fund $5,216,000 additional dollars. I'm sorry.
Morgan, I apologize for not catching this weekend when we reviewed, but that number that you have there for the salary portion, I believe that's all funds, isn't it? And it should just be general fund?
I just noticed that. I think that is an error. That
so
we
it would
need
be
to back
about
off of that.
$600,000 less than that. It would be actually $4.6 million instead of $5.2. And then that bottom line number would change by the same amount, so it would be roughly $8.9 million deficit.
I apologize. We'll get these numbers exact, but what would need to be funded in the general fund for raises would be approximately, together with the streets, would be approximately $4,600,000. We would identify that the wastewater pilot, as discussed in the resolution that was set forth last year, would need to be reduced by $400,000. So that's a reduction in revenue to the general fund. And then health insurance, I spoke earlier about the $800,000 figure. The portion that is for general fund only would be $639,000. $418 additional needed to fund the health insurance increase. And then the items that we discussed, the request for additional resources that directors and managers have identified, that figure of $4,729,000, that's left over that would need to be discussed and or funded. So that leaves us operating at a deficit, at a loss of $8,900,000 if we funded all of those items that have been identified at this time.
Morgan, is that based off the 4% increase in revenue that we've been talking about, that we were doing the estimate on?
Yes, and that is one thing that we wanted to speak to, that there is the biggest issue that can change in the general fund revenue would be when certified property tax values come in. At this point, we only have estimates which are up the 4% that we had discussed. When those certified values come in late this month, that should yield an additional increase to our revenue. We do not have clear direction on what that will be yet. It certainly depends on the appraisal district working through their process of appeals and all of that. And so there's a lot of variables working there. And so there could be a further increase later this month that could fund a portion of that. So that brings us to where we would identify for solutions that certainly.
What is it per percentage point that we would actually get in? Let's say if it went from an estimate of 4% to an estimate of 8%, how much extra money would that give us?
What was the marginal revenue? It was about 1.2 million?
I think it
between
was
1.2 and 1.3 million on that 4.8%. So, if you doubled that, it'd be about 2.5 million.
Okay, so we're still short.
So that would assist with, instead of having an $8.9 million deficit, we would back off of that $1.2 million if that went up if that doubled from estimates to certifieds. And so we're certainly dealing with a unique situation. Usually estimates that we receive in April-May timeframe are not up 4.8%. So this year is an unusual year that estimates were already up that amount. And so we are not there's a lot of uncertainty there for when certified values come in, sir.
Are you getting ready to, Morgan, are you getting ready to balance the budget?
That would be the
Are you
goal.
getting ready to walk us through an exercise where we can get perspective on balancing the budget?
Yes, sir.
All right. I think what we're about to do, I'm sorry, go ahead. I think we're about to play a little what if, and to get an idea where we're at. And
Staff has identified some items that could help balance the budget. Certainly property tax values, as those certified values come in, that will be a large part of it. Although I think we've identified a figure a deficit larger than what can be satisfied with that alone. The second item there, a fee assessment, I apologize, this is not to be confused with the water fee assessment. We're specifically speaking to general fund on this. This would be an assessment across the board of all fees that are charged, whether they're punitive charges for noncompliance or user fees for services. We go through an annual assessment of where those fees should be, and that marginal revenue could be a solution for funding these priorities and items. The next item there would be to freeze the wastewater pilot at where it is. That would yield some assistance. I've left that at zero, but it is a solution that the council could speak to. That's $400,000, which is a large change to the general fund budget that could help solve this solution. But again, staff has left that at zero, pending discussion today on how we can move forward with that.
remember that is actually just a transfer from the sewer fund to the general fund.
Then the pay-as-you-go capital that we discussed earlier, one item that would be definitely eligible for that pay-as-you-go capital would be street maintenance. And so we have $1,508,000 that by council's direction we've been setting aside in a capital fund, but is available to assist with balancing the general fund budget. So if we wanted to utilize that $1.5 million, which staff would recommend as a solution towards balancing this budget.
Remember that is not restricted to capital. That's general fund revenue that we use for capital, but it's free to be allocated in whatever way council sees as the best use.
The next item there is our indirect cost plan. We do have a study which states for outside entities outside the general fund, what would they pay for administrative services and overhead? And so we're looking at implementing that indirect cost plan, which could yield some additional revenue to the general fund to assist with items. And this is simply passing those costs on to the funds that operate outside the general fund for support for example, finance, human resources, city attorney's office, all of those items. So to the extent that a fund outside the general fund uses those resources, it's appropriate to transfer those funds back in to speak to those items. And so Tina and I are still working through that. It could yield additional revenue to the general fund of up to $300,000. However, we are still working through that solution. So right now we have that proposed at $0, but there will be a change in the indirect cost plan. We're just working through what kind of solution that would yield. Also, the next item that we have is the retirement rate decrease. We have made some aggressive improvements in our TMRS, Texas Municipal Retirement System plan, and so we're yielding some benefits from that now, that the employer contribution for what we contribute of every employee's salary amount is proposed to decrease from 18.31% to 17.7%, which in the general fund would yield almost $100,000 in savings. That would be implemented January 1st, and I believe the last time we had a reduction like this, it's unusual that we would, but the last time that we had a reduction like this, the TMRS actually allowed us to implement it earlier than January 1st, which would yield an additional maybe $20,000 savings to implement it earlier, but we have not received permission yet that we're going to be allowed to do that. So we do know that we will have those savings in the coming year's budget. And then the last item we have there is to unfund those requests for additional resources. Remember, we had identified $4.7 million from the directors and managers that need to be funded to offer services adequately. And so if we just decided to unfund some portion of those or not approve some portion of those, that would also assist with balancing the budget.
Morgan, on the fee assessment deal, when was the last time that we've made big increases on those fees? It's been a long time, hasn't it?
It has been. I know that really across the board, we want to do a very thorough assessment, and this is on a year-by-year basis. And again, the cost of doing business just changed on a yearly basis, and we have to be responsible in ensuring that we are providing the funds necessary to run the services. So that is something that on a year-by-year basis has to happen. We cannot go 5, 6, 7 years and then try to do a 15 or 20% increase on those in those areas. So that's going to be really vital and important that we start doing that every year.
Yes, sir. There are fees on the books that have been in place for over 10 years, some even more. The last time we did a full-launched assessment of those was when the budget division was fully staffed. So now that we're fully staffed again, we're working. It should be an annual process as part of this budget. But as we're fully staffed now, we are making it a part of that process to at least assess where we are and bring disparities to the council for discussion of this is where we've identified some big differences that would be for your approval and for your discussion. So
That's a very small amount, though.
And so that's all I really have for you this morning as we're moving forward with budget deadlines. I don't know if it's the council's pleasure to go back and hit on discussion for these items, or to schedule another work session later if it's your pleasure to speak in more depth about perhaps the water fund or other general fund issues that we have to really continue working on.
We need to balance that budget. Do you have a spreadsheet?
I do.
Would you pull that up, please, and let's just walk through an exercise so we can see how realistic our options are.
So this is just a summary of what we went over in the PowerPoint, that we currently have revenue over expenditures of $1.5 million. I'm sorry, Tina, do you have that figure again on? This number should instead be that $4,600,000. to fund the council and priorities and goals for the general fund. Again, this is just speaking to general fund. Pay-as-you-go capital, that could be an opportunity to plug in that $1.5 million that's available from capital into investment with satisfying this budget. The wastewater pilot, that's reducing that by $400,000, which would be reducing it to $0. The request for additional resources, like I said, we have the details available in the handout. I don't know if you want to get into that now, or that could reduce as we identify which items are absolutely critical and need to be included. And again, as I stated earlier, when the staff budget review occurred, we did identify those items that we felt were absolutely critical. These are the remaining items that certainly bear discussion and additional review.
Does that include also the raises on that, or is that just shortages in positions and hiring of new people and things like that?
That does not include raises. That
Okay.
only includes, it includes where managers have identified they don't have the resources to do their job. So it could be supplies, it could be equipment, it could be new and additional personnel. I think there are a couple in there that are revisions to existing personnel. For example, in the engineering department, where we're unable to recruit those positions, reclassifying those to be at a higher pay grade. And so this is not across the board pay raises for existing staff.
Okay.
This is just to offer services at the level that would be appropriate as directed by the council in the past. We just don't have the money to in the budget that right now to offer those.
These are actually requests that have been made actually over the past few years that have gone unfunded because we were short, and we've taken a kind of like a short-term look at savings. And I think that we want to make sure that we're careful that we don't start shooting ourselves in the foot for the long term. And trying to make these short-term savings, we want to look and see if, in fact, if it's something that can be funded. Like Morgan said, we did identify about $1.3 million that we felt that was absolutely essential. But these are the other requests that we should take a look at. And at some point, if it's not this year, in the near future, it will have to be funded. A lot of these are very worthwhile requests, and we want to make sure that we get to the point where we can start funding these. But again, we do have that list of those requests, and we do have staff that is available as far as directors that had those requests. So if you have any questions for them, if we go into this in detail, they're readily available to answer any questions.
The next item there is the increase necessary to fund health insurance. This is the general fund portion if health insurance went up 14%, which we are estimating that it will be about 12 to 14%.
Could be.
And then
Hoping for 2%.
the certified property tax values, as we discussed earlier, for example, if that did yield an additional $1.2 million, that would assist in bringing down that need, and that number, as we discussed, is very uncertain at this time. Fee assessment, if we increase that by some amount, if we there are some fees that are on the table that absolutely should have a punitive element to them as they relate to compliance. And so if we did yield, I would expect that we would yield some kind of increased revenue from our assessment of fees. And then the retirement rate decrease, that added almost $100,000, $96,876 to the general fund is the savings that yielded from that. And then the indirect cost plan, which is that final solution we've identified that we're still working towards. But for example, if that did add $300,000 to the general fund, that would bring us back to a deficit of almost $5.3 million. And so there certainly is some more work to be done on how to implement those items and still meet council's priorities and goals and still keep operating. So,
Morgan,
yes, sir.
how much do we have in fund balance?
Do you want to speak to that, Tina?
And then along with that, how much do we have out of this budget that will roll forward?
I'm sorry?
How much out of this budget do we think will roll forward toward fund balance?
Right now in the general fund, under current budget amounts, our ending fund balance is projected to be close to $8 million.
And then how much do we expect to roll forward from this budget?
Well, that's not as easy to predict, but we're currently at 81% of revenue when we're 67% through the year. So we are projecting to trend a little higher than what we expected. However, we have probably received all of the property tax monies, or at least the great majority of that. And so we would be a little bit further than we expect to be at this point in the year. So it's,
Councilman, I think probably $1 million is safe. We should get that in sales tax alone, but, so $1 million's probably safe. In addition, as we contemplate the execution of the contract, the new contract for landfill and trash collection services, there will be some benefit to the general fund that goes with that also. But
Well, we'll immediately have a, 3.6 million release of dedicated funds on liability?
well, yes, we obligate those though when we roll those funds up together.
Right.
And while it for our budgeting situation's sake, it will have its impact in the landfill fund. Because we roll those funds up together, they have an impact on the general fund when we combine those funds in the CAFR, in the annual report. But as far as the budget goes, it'll have that impact will be seen in the landfill fund.
Rather than the general fund?
Yes, sir.
But it could be moved.
Yes, sir.
Approximately what could that figure be?
Shane, do you remember what those upfront figures added up to? There were a couple of, there was some debt service amount, $600,000 and change. There was payment for the existing accrued liability, which was $3 million and change. 3.6 was that, Shane? 3.8?
The, to offset the existing, deficit that we have now, was 2.6 with an additional million to bring that up to 3.6. That will go into that fund, and then there's the 670,000 to offset the two bond payments.
Okay.
The last two bond payments. And then, of course, they are going to also create a trust for, at 4.375 that should, free up the liabilities that we have against the general fund balance. But that's, again, that's not necessarily increasing the fund balance. It just frees that money up from the liability that we had established against it.
I think the key there, I like the free thinking about the no boundaries thinking, but I think we want to count those beans and see where they settle before we try to allocate them. When you say that'd be the best way, Shane?
Correct, and we will need to make sure that we do maintain some fund balance there as we move forward. The way this existing contract is structured, we will need to maintain a fund balance as we move forward, over the next, term of the contract.
Also, won't we have about in between $200,000 and $300,000 in additional monies that they're going to be giving us to help with billing and some of those sort of things?
Yes, on the billings and collections side, it in the past it's been a direct reimbursement to the water billing and accounting departments from the collection side. Revenues from the actual landfill are what we will see that will probably be able to be utilized for other items.
So are those monies that go to the accounting department in this budget, or is that more monies that are going to be coming into the city? Is it dedicated at this time within our budget is, I guess, what I'm asking.
The old fee structure's in this proposal.
Yes.
The old one, but not the new one. And the new
That's
one
right.
has the increase.
The new one will increase by 1%, yes.
Okay.
Right.
Do we have anything we could sell?
We do. We have land.
We do. We have land.
Well, we do. What our goal here would be to find, since these are recurring revenues and expenditures, we would like a recurring solution. And so, I think to make progress today, I think we've got a goal to get out of here by 11, is that right? To make progress today, I believe we've got some detail on some of these lines that I think we want to look at. If you're, for example, Rodney was asking questions about the additional requests. Maybe we want to go through some of those and see what we think about those.
I think that's where we're going to have to find most
That's
of
the
it.
big one.
That's the one, that's where it is.
Maybe we want to revisit the council goals and priorities, and let's see, how were those numbers computed? What does that take? And those are the two big lines here, and thank you.
So I apologize, this is small and hard to read, but this is an electronic version of what you have before you. This first box, I think which is the first 2 pages of your printout, are what the staff budget review has identified as items that we've got to fund to the tune of $1.3 million. And you'll see recurring items in this include electricity, water, for our facilities, particularly our parks. For example, when you see Producers Park maintenance of $71,300, I believe that's the electricity and water component associated with maintaining that park. So that's what yields your $1,300,000. The next box, which is other items for consideration, are the $4.7 million that we're discussing. And so you'll see that this includes additional personnel, increases to personnel, increases to operating budget, increases to capital budget. And so this is all the things as they relate to the general fund. The other funds we're able to balance without needing this process.
Morgan, the 1.3 is included already,
Correct.
and the 4.7 is made up of all the remaining pages, right?
Correct.
Okay.
So a total request from the divisions was over $6 million. And all of that is available for discussion.
Morgan,
Yes, sir.
could you go back to that last slide you showed us before the, okay.
And I apologize, this appears it should be $4,739,302.
Can you squeeze any bit of enlargement out of that you can get to make it easier to read, please? Thank you. Now, Morgan, I think one of the things that we ought to point out here is what's on the screen includes completely utilizing all of the pay-as-you-go capital amount. So if we wanted to continue to reserve a piece of that for pay-as-you-go capital, that utilization would have to go down. For example, if we wanted to maintain $500,000 a year available for pay-as-you-go capital, and we could only use the $1,008,000 in this exercise. So I suspect that utilization of all of that 1.5 is not necessarily realistic.
And I'm sorry, just to clarify that the total pay-as-you-go capital is 1.75 million. 250,000 is set aside for fire truck, which is, I think, an intended recommended item. So this would be the remainder of that. So not all of it, but just the remainder after fire truck.
Are we gonna start asking questions about it, or are we gonna? Okay.
Go.
Personnel is probably the easiest thing on here. Shane, you've got on, where'd Shane go? There he is. You've got on here 14 full-time additional employees. Can you even hire 14 full-time additional employees? I mean, realistically, I don't.
Not currently, under the existing conditions, we're having a hard time. I've got, I have about 18 open positions right now currently, and or vacated or fixing to be vacated, and we have very little success.
So, I mean, can we cut that number in half to 7 and just be working towards a goal of that? Or do you think you can surpass 7?
Well, and would we even need them if we had the 18? You know, I know that there's gonna be a lot of catch-up if we do go to full staff, but, I mean.
Well, and of course, that 18 was across all divisions. It wasn't just,
Yeah, correct.
it wasn't just in the like the parks, where we are significantly behind in personnel due to all the increase, the increases that we've had over the years without any additional personnel. That's where we are so far behind. But again, I currently have 8 openings in parks, and by the end of the month, I'll have 2 more. We had 2 more turn in resignations last week, so end of last week. So,
Don't you switch as needed on your staff? In other words, just because they're designated to parks, they're not going to sit there and twiddle their thumbs if you need them in another area, and vice versa.
Right, streets and bridge.
If we get in an emergency situation, of course, that takes, that's wherever people need to go is what we do. But I don't necessarily, I've never, since I've been here, we've never had, an opportunity to sit around and twiddle our thumbs with not enough work to do. So the parks guys are plenty busy, street and bridge guys are plenty busy. We don't necessarily have excess staff anywhere to be able to move from one department to the other. I do have issues, like right now at Lake Maintenance. He's down to about, probably about 35 or 40% staffing level at this point. He normally has 11 guys, and he's down to 4. So, or 9 guys, and he's down 9 or 10 guys. He's down to 4 actual workers with him and his supervisor. So, at times if he gets in a bind, I'll send guys out to help. If we need to help shred big areas and get it done in a quicker amount of time, I'll send some guys out there to help with that. But for the most part, everybody has to kind of stay within their area just to keep up with what they all have.
I guess, though, what I'm asking on the question is, and I'm looking at high dollar items on here, because in order for us to get to this thing to be budgeted, high dollar items are going to have to take place. I don't think you can hire 14 people. And we're going to get to another one here that's going to make some other people mad, is that on the police, there's no way we can hire 18 people. They'll tell you themselves they can't do it. I mean, how many do you think you could hire? That's the question.
Right now, in the labor market right now, I don't know that I could hire any. It's just a matter of, at some point of, and from my perspective, of actually funding the positions, whether we actually are able to hire them or not. At some point, we do need to actually fund them so we can at least try. Again, I don't know right now if there's, you could give me 20 positions. I don't think it would matter. I don't think I could get that many hired. But again, at some point, we need to start funding them so we can at least start trying, opening those positions up, getting them out, and trying.
Well, how about we take the money that's in here and we just give them just use that as part of some of the raises that we're going to be talking about, and try to make them more happy that way.
Yeah.
I think, and I don't want to speak for Shane, but if you had to choose with the parks and those type of places where we're trying to fill the positions, right now, in keeping the pay adequate where he can try to actually fill those positions is probably more important. Those positions are important, but he needs the pay where it needs to be so that he can actually fill them. Yeah,
we can actually fill the positions and or keep the positions. Again, I had 2 more resign last week, so, and these are kind of mid-level department employees that actually resigned. So it's hard to keep people right now, and it's definitely hard to find anybody to hire right now. So we don't get that many applications.
Well, Charlie, Jeff?
I think Mr. Fleming has a very good point with the labor force such as it is and everyone leaving to go to the oil position. However, possibly, those need to be cut out of the budget. That's a big ticket item, can be cut out of the budget because you're not going to fill them, but possibly some of your lower positions you can concentrate on your college students that can't go work out in the oil fields, that need to pick up part-time, and reduce your budget request considerably because you're not going to fill the positions. The other thing is I need to understand what we've been given, how it's calculated and figured this, because all the pages say the same thing: target increase, request, summary. And on page 1, I'm in particular looking at Shane, your Producers Park, your Highway Padrone Park, your Meadow Creek Park maintenance. But on page 3, I believe it was. Yes, page 3, those same amounts, and they're different amounts. Producers Park maintenance on page 1 is $71,300. On Producers Park maintenance on page 3, it's $22,200. And is this, you went back and you said, I'm going to need more than the original was done? Help me understand how these figures work.
Ms. Farmer, if I could speak to that, because Shane submitted a total amount of both of those figures together for each park. We identified in the detail how much was electricity and water, and so that's what's in that first box. That first box that subtotals $1,300,000, that the staff budget review has identified that that's the portion that we have to pay, that has got to happen. And the remainder is additional maintenance that's needed at the park. For example, botanical and agricultural, cleanup, maintenance supplies for the bathrooms, those kinds of things.
But the format's very confusing. It doesn't say plus electricity, plus this, plus that on this page. So I need an answer. Is the $71,300 in addition to his $22,200 request?
Yes, ma'am. It's in addition.
Well, then I need to see a total for that line to be the 90 something or other, because this kind of skews the total values.
The grand total is correct. We believe that they should be considered separately.
Which page is your grand total?
The last page of $6,040,000.
Okay, the last page doesn't say Producers Park, Jaime Padrone Park, totals. I need to know what each park is costing per its size, and this
isn't the cost, this is just the marginal increase or cost, just the additional amount requested. So we can get that detail to you, I believe. I believe Shane has that information.
This is a summary of the amounts that were requested by department managers.
Well, it
And-
says Shane requested that on the third page, and Shane requested this on the first page.
Yep.
So that doesn't tell me that y'all have added to or made adjustments to his numbers.
The key is that on the second page, about halfway down the page, you'll see a subtotal there of 1.3 million. The amounts on page 1 and the top of page 2 were identified as, in the staff budget review, as items that we have to, that by not budgeting, we just have our head in the sand. They were identified as things that are going to happen, need to happen, or are under contract to happen, and not budgeting them is just pretending they don't exist when they do exist. The items which follow are genuinely additional requests, and we do have that detail, and we'd be glad to go over it with you if you'd like. Absolutely.
I just think it's nice that at budget workshops that we go over it then and not one-on-one individuals so that we all have the same understanding at the same time.
Sure.
One of my questions also, as Morgan's pulling this up, I thought that we could pay for these items out of a half-cent sales tax.
Which items?
The one that Charlotte's asking about on our
Get paid
parks.
for parks
maintenance.
Parks?
Pay for them out of what, I'm sorry?
Half-cent sales tax.
This budget, this initial budget amount includes transfers from the Development Corporation of approximately $250,000. So there is a portion of, there is funding from the Development Corporation for this already in here. Do you guys remember what the detail is?
$250,000 is transferred every year from the Development Corporation to the General Fund for Parks Maintenance as set forth in one of the ballot directives. With a 2% inflationary factor.
I thought that amount changed each year with.
With a 2% inflationary factor.
All right, so it's approximately 250, but you don't have the exact number.
I think it's $253,012.
So-
And that is for sports field maintenance, not
No, sir,
parks
that's general
maintenance.
fund.
That's for sports field maintenance,
Okay.
where we take care of Northern Little League, SASA, Lakeview, Western, where we take care of those facilities. That's what those funds were set aside for, was to take care of those facilities.
Why? Why is it not all the parks? Why are we breaking it out?
It was set up that way initially because those were areas where they funded improvements at those facilities, so it was to help maintain those.
It was that way in the ballot, is my understanding.
Well, but the half-cent sales tax also says parks in general. That's why we're developing these parks. Seems illogical for me for us to develop parks with half-cent sales tax and not maintain parks with half-cent sales tax.
And I have a question about the fountain for the River Stage. There's almost $122,000.
For repair.
Why is that not half-cent sales tax? Also see a contingency for equipment replacement at the Texas Sports Complex of $180,000. What is this?
And those are all also things we talked about, whether or not, you want to try and allocate those funds from a different source. It's currently not done that way, but we also talked about looking at projects where you might be able to do venue tax, those kind of things. I mean, there's options, it's just those won't happen. A venue, for instance, won't happen overnight. That would take a vote of the citizens.
Can we take one item at a time and just, let's finish the personnel? I mean,
Yeah.
the first question that I had, because we're going to plug numbers into this, right?
Correct.
I'm not,
That's correct.
I just want to make sure that we all understand what we're doing on.
Mr. Mayor.
So can we take your personnel from 14 to 7?
Charlotte's
Or
leaving,
10?
we don't have a quorum, so we all need to take a break.
I'll be right back.
It's 10:02, let's get the meeting
Oh,
started
no.
again.
We're going to use those for
Everybody ready to go? Go, Morgan.
Okay, so for each of these items, as we pick one to talk about in more detail, I do have a more detail in a request. Each of the managers submitted this, and so if you give me just a moment, I can get those up. So I think we left at the full-time personnel request, the 14 request. I think that's 14 different forms, so I don't know if it would make sense to get into each of those specifically, but I can attempt to.
Morgan, could we pick an easy one and go through it and you show us how the form works and what the explanation is and everything?
Sure.
All right, let's pick on Daniel. We got one in here that says Daniel Valenzuela, City Council, mileage. And actually, it says he's got Daniel's name on it, but I think Becky prepared it. And I think it's a request for additional mileage.
So $3,000 here. The request was actually for $6,000, $3,000 for additional mileage expense, $3,000 for software maintenance. However, we were able to fund that in the current fiscal year, so that has a line through it now, and all that's included for your review is the $3,000 for mileage for council members. So this will be a detailed line-by-line form.
Okay, and the key here is not so much the request itself, but I want you to understand how these forms work. Our budget folks make these forms available, and departments they make their request on these forms. So, on this one, Becky's seeing a lot of mileage being paid out, and she thought that that amount needed to go up, and so she prepared this form and submitted it in accordance with the rules. So, that's a very easy one, but we've got more complex ones, and ones that have gotten your attention. We'd be glad to go over those, however you'd like to cover it. Or not covered if that's your choice.
My question is, we're dealing with a huge deficit here. And even if we pick these things apart and take 5 or 10% out of each of them, we're still never going to get close to the $5 million that we're in deficit. Now, the first half of this is 1.3. It has to be done, but the rest of this is a wish list. And I really don't see how we're going to get there. There's simply not enough money in the budget.
Well,
so really, what are we doing when we're sitting here trying to pick this thing apart? And there's not enough money to fund this. Now, our priorities are wages and streets. And if we're set on that, I don't see where we're going to get the money to fund the rest of these things. And some of these things may just have to wait, as they have been waiting. So, I don't know, that's just kind of my take on this.
Well, and my thought on that also is every dollar that we take out of this is taken away from our priorities. So, I mean, are our priorities or are they not?
Well, Morgan, what I'd like for staff to do, if possible, is we're looking at seal coating every 7 years. If we change that to 8 years, I don't think it's. I actually thought when I was on the council before that it was 8 years instead of 7 years. I'd like to see we could keep that as a council priority and reduce that cost by some figure. That would actually save us some money.
Morgan, we've got a couple of comments here. Can we use those as examples in the spreadsheet and show what impact that would have? So, for example, we heard the mayor talk about, there you go, about not funding those.
So if we did not fund any of those additional resources, only the 1.3 million, which we've identified are head in the sand type items, that would bring us to a deficit of $1,013,000.
And if, let's say that Councilman Self's suggestion yields a reduction in the cost.
I roughly computed it at about $500,000. I think Shane computed it at 400,000.
About 430,000 was what it would reduce it going to 8 years.
Okay, now your deficit, I'm sorry.
So recall that we are talking about investing all of our pay-as-you-go capital into these priorities, keeping none of it back for capital projects, still reducing the wastewater pilot to zero, still funding an up to 14% increase to health insurance, hoping that certified property tax values come in at another $1.2 million. A fee assessment, I spoke to someone in the back who has a proposal right now that could yield substantially more than that, but some impact from a fee assessment of $20,000, a savings in TMRS of $100,000, and indirect cost plan could be up to $300,000. So that would yield us at a deficit of $583,000, which I think gets us a lot closer to a balanced budget.
Morgan,
Shall I?
you've got wastewater pilot on there at 400. How much did we reduce that last year?
In fiscal year 14, we reduced it from 500,000 to 400,000. We reduced it by 100,000. We proposed a couple of options, one that we reduced it $100,000 every year for 5 years, one that we reduced it $250,000 every year for 2 years. What we ultimately were directed to do in the resolution was to reduce it $100,000 in year 1 and discuss the remainder later.
What if we took another $100,000 bite this year? What does this look like?
That brings our deficit down to $283,000 if all of the rest of these parts work. There's some uncertainty here with fee assessments and with the indirect cost plan and with certified property tax values.
And certified tax property values, that was when we discussed doubling up, right, or taking it to around 8. So, I mean, that's very liberal. I mean, that's
That's right.
That's pretty bold.
yeah. Well, I think we're going to be there, though.
Those are key decisions, and if the rest of that works out, you're very close to balancing the budget and making significant progress on goals.
Well, this is manageable here, 283. We can work with that. But we can't work with $5.2 million of a deficit.
And agreed, if we had all of the money in our kitty to do the work for the streets or to hire everyone that is needed, we couldn't do it in 1 year anyway. So I want to see
correct.
the request to be more reasonable, that put per year, per 12 months, and then we know we've got a balance to come, and that's the way we did the pipeline replacement that we started in '05 that had been started, is we knew that we'd get approximately so many miles done that year, but we would still have so many miles left to do. So we knew it was going to be an ongoing expense. But there's no way we could do it all at once, so let's don't put it all in the budget all at once.
And some of these requests from the directors can be phased in over a number of years as well. We can go back and take a look at that, but at this point, and Ms. Farmer's correct, we definitely can't fund all of it overnight. A lot of it has been building up over the past several years. I'm actually quite pleased that we're actually able to address the goals that the city council had, plus the $1.3 million really that in the past we hadn't put in the budget. That was a necessity, and it's in there now. So absolutely, the 283,000 is much more manageable now.
Well, and I would still like to see if we can't get our park maintenance out of half-cent sales tax money. Here again, that will take it down roughly another, just off of the 1,000,003. That would take that over about $125,000, just roughly looking at it.
And I'm also looking on this front page. There is $282,000 worth of overtime in our mandatory budget. Almost $250 million of it, $248,000 of it comes from the fire department. Is it really necessary that we have all this overtime? Isn't this a figure that we could work on to reduce? The overtime that we're paying is actually more than the deficit that we have right there. $282,000. We're dealing with the deficit of whatever it was before you change the screen. Is there any way we can drop this overtime down to balance this thing out? Why are we paying so much overtime?
I'm going to get Brian to come up and explain it, but it's due basically to the amount of people that you pull in when people are out sick and all of those things. But I'll get Brian to explain it in greater detail so I don't confuse any of the matters.
I'll run away. He didn't want to.
Be happy to get away.
Right now, our budget isn't even funded enough to cover the FLSA overtime, which is the mandatory overtime that's paid for the number of hours they work. That does not even include minimum manning standards, like it takes 39 people on duty every day for us to operate. Once we go below that on sick or vacation, and we have a limited amount of vacation time that people can take, so you can't have 15 people taking off vacation. We limit that number, but if you have sick or other things that happen during that day, if it takes us down below 39 people, we end up hiring overtime. Right now, I think I have $160,000 roughly in my overtime budget, something like that. That's not even enough to cover FLSA overtime, which is not minimum manning overtime. So several years ago, I had about 340,000 in overtime, and it was reduced. That's the reality of it. To get around hiring overtime, the only way you get around that would be to close stations or something like that when you didn't have the personnel or couldn't man it.
Thank you, Brian.
Which brings me to a question with staffing, and I'm looking at the back page with reference to police, 18 additional sworn officers, 900,000, and a uniform and equipment for 18 is 45,000. That's nearly $1 million right there. Can we realistically hire 18 people in 1 year?
Well, we've taken all that out of the budget now, though. already.
He's struck all that.
Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't hear that. You're on my right side. I didn't hear it.
You know, with the scenario that we're working now, we've struck everything but the $1.3 million that they say is absolutely necessary. So that's just a scenario as it stands.
We did have
We put it back in.
We did have a grant that we just recently applied for as well for additional officers, and a portion of that would be funded by the city as well. We don't know how that's going to go. I know the chief has applied the last couple of years and hasn't received those grants, but we're hoping that this year that it goes through. It'll help us address at least a portion, I believe, of 7, 8 officers. So if that happens, then we'll make it work within our budget.
Well, I think it's important that we raise salaries. I think that's important. That's one of our goals. And I think it's important that we address our streets because they're deteriorating rapidly. But we only have X amount of money to spend, and that's all we have to spend. Looking for wisdom here.
I agree.
Well, once again, I made a proposal through for 4 years of us taking back to the voters the readjustment of the half-cent sales tax to be able to come up with this $2.6 million, and I've been shot down. But once again, I'll throw it out there that that's a way that we could possibly redirect some of our sales tax revenue, along with the fact that we're increasing in sales tax revenue, and probably will for the next few years anyway.
Mayor?
Yes, sir.
Don's going to have another shot at that because this 2.6 million, or 2.6 minus the 430,000, is just maintenance. That's crack seal, seal coat, striping, pothole repair. That does not include any mill and overlay activity, no complete reconstruction activity. So this just gets us closer to the kind of maintenance activity we need to have. That's before we even reconstruct one street. So remember that our action plan associated with that included completion of the street assessment study, and then development of either an action plan or a set of priorities for street what do you call it, Shane? Street repair and redevelopment? Rehabilitation. So we're going to have an opportunity to talk about more monies needed for streets, and so this again just gets us started on the path to proper maintenance.
Correct.
But you've made a lot of progress here. A significant piece of your priorities now for this year are being funded, for the action necessary this year are being funded.
Well, once we know what our property tax money is going to be, that'll be at the end of the month, Tina?
Yes, sir, they're due by July 25th.
So then we will know exactly what we have to deal with then, and we won't be guessing. Also, we know we've got money coming from Republic after we sign this contract. And we'll know that in the July 25th. Will we know all, how long will it take after we sign the contract to know exactly what this,
How it affects us.
how this will affect us?
Well, we were thinking that we might bring back to council a report on activity since the contract change, kind of a progress update that would include a financial element. So we were thinking at least 60 to 90 days down the road. But we can address timing as,
So
actually, that may be early. 90 days would be closer. When does the new effective date of the new contract change?
August 1.
August 1. So if we gave them 60 days or so to kind of settle in.
that's
maybe
not going to be in this budget cycle then?
No, sir. But, and we do need to, we need to really see where we end the year, with that being part of what we end the year with, and then go from there.
Well, it can be a part of this budget cycle. I mean, I know that we have to declare the tax rate and all those sort of things, but it's still a definite amount of money that we are going to know about. So we could basically say for 10 months, this is what that percentage is, and go from there.
We could, but most of those dollars we're talking about are one-time dollars. There is going to be an annual stream, but it's much smaller in relation to the kind of the big upfront numbers we're talking about. And so the big upfront numbers we've been talking about and throwing around, the $3 million and that kind of thing, those are one-time monies.
But we're also taking our pay-as-we-go capital outlay and addressing it here, so we could take those monies and address that, take that off the board, because your capital outlay in many instances are one-time things also.
That's true.
And I'm also going to be asking for some of this money to be put in the rainy day fund as a savings account. I still want that rainy day fund. I still want some funds to protect us down the road.
Mayor, and every year, at the end of the year, especially additional revenues that we do have above the expenditures, it actually does go into our fund balance, So we've actually had, this past year, the report that we received, we had a nice amount of money actually that went over, a little over $1 million that went into the fund.
Well, we missed the opportunity for a rainy day fund in the hotel motel monies, because that's not a given or a guarantee, so holding the line on that would have been.
But just to put this into perspective, this $5 million deficit that we're talking about here, that's 15 cents on the tax rate? Isn't that property tax about 18 cents to go? To fund that, we would have to go up on the, because it's about $330,000 per 1 cent.
333.
It's
a little bit.
Go ahead.
That was close to what last year's value was. It's a little higher this year. I want to say it was around 380 something.
Yes, ma'am.
But that's what we would have to go up on the tax rate on our citizens if we were to fund these requests as they have been presented. And that's not even a possibility.
Well, what you have in front of you is where we left off. I think we would suggest a revisit of the general fund after we get those certified values in, unless there's anything else in here that you'd like to discuss.
Till we get the certified values in, I think this is probably as close as we can get it. I don't know. Y'all are the...
I don't see anything on the 1.3 that we can really cut right now. I think that.
No.
I agree.
Well, I had doubts about that overtime, but Brian explained that. That's something we have to live with that, so...
Mayor, Council, thank you all for your input. It's valuable for us. I know that we can go through there, and we went through this whole process and kind of experimented changing some numbers, but we definitely needed your direction on this to make sure that we're on the same page. I think we definitely are. So, again, thank you for your input. Appreciate that.
Are we in agreement? Are we in agreement on this kind of consensus of council?
Yes.
Yes.
Mayor, we've had a couple of council members follow up and say, I'd like to see some detail on this or this. if you would, please coordinate with us. We'll be glad to get you more information on any of these issues that either that you're aware of now or that come up between now and then, and we'll be glad to help you out. And
Well, one of the things I'd like to say is to commend Morgan and Tina and their department, because I know over a holiday to have a Monday morning 8 o'clock session and have all this stuff ready for us, they put in some hours. And I wanted them to know that I appreciate that. I think the council does.
Yes. Thank you.
we appreciate our award-winning finance folks.
Well, speaking of finance, since everybody else is their wish list, I still am pushing for an additional person in the audit.
Internal audit.
Finance department is desperately needed for everything that we have going on. So I really don't want to cut that possibility or that budget on that.
Okay.
Why don't we make a note that should be a discussion item when we revisit the general fund? Did we have that listed? Did that get turned
Yes,
in?
sir.
as
It's on your
was?
page
Yeah, it was on it.
5.
Okay, so it's in here.
55,000.
It's part of the 4.7 million, Ms. Farmer.
We can make budget adjustments as we go through the year if we have more money to work with.
Yes, sir.
So we can,
Okay, I think we're good.
I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
Second.
All in favor, aye? Aye. This meeting is over. Thank you.